Prayer Book Lectionary identifies this Sunday as the 15th Sunday after Pentecost in year B of our reading cycle. I have a note penciled in my prayer book that says it's Yuck Sunday. Let me explain. Well, in college, my fraternity brother, Frank Allen, and I were hired by the rector of Holy Trinity in Decatur to start an after-school program for kids, mostly boys. We were to play ball. That was our solution to it. And it did well. But then one day, Father Tisdale came to us and said, I need help. We've lost a Sunday school teacher. I would like for you to finish out the year teaching a boys' Sunday school class. He was hard to say no to, and so we did. And our curriculum consisted of reading the lessons for a Sunday and asking these 5th grade boys what they thought they meant. And for this Sunday, we read to them that gospel that I just read to you, of Jesus addressing the crowd on the hillside saying, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. The end of the reading of the gospel is always the gospel of our Lord. When we read it to those boys, one kid stood up, grabbed his throat and said, yuck. I have never forgotten. I have penciled in that this is Yuck Sunday. For the past 5 or 6 weeks, our gospel lessons have all been from that 6th chapter of John's Gospel. Of Jesus addressing a multitude on a grassy hillside, of miraculously feeding them with a little boy's lunch, a little bread and a couple of dried fish, and having enough left over to stave off hunger for the crowd. Needless to say, they were impressed. More than anything else, even more than food, what he was offering them was hope. Hope. They're poor, they're hungry, they're hopeless. They're living in an occupied country under the heel of Roman soldiers. Their leadership is in cahoots with the Romans. Their taxes are outrageous. And they have very little to eat and barely the clothes to wear on their back. When Jesus is offering them is, first of all, hope. What he is feeding them is not necessarily just bread. He's feeding them hope. But when he starts talking about eating flesh and drinking blood, that's more than they can stand. John's Gospel is Jesus presenting himself in the form of metaphors to people. He said to the woman at the well who had been shunned by the other women in the village so that she had to come at noontime instead of sunup to fill her bucket. He says to her, I am water. At a wedding feast, when they run out of wine, he miraculously transforms jugs of water into not only wine, but good wine. He says, I am the joy for your heart. Those are all metaphors. But on that hillside, after he has fed those people, they're wanting to make him a leader. When he gives them hope, he says, you have to feast on me. You have to feast on me. I'm not sure whether anyone in the crowd grabbed their throat and said, yuck. But John records that many left him right after that statement. They left him. He is wine to gladden the heart. He is the kind of water that quenches thirst. That is who he is. But you have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Jews, like other Middle Eastern cultures, believe that there is a substance in blood called nephesh. Nephesh. It is the source of life. It cannot be extracted. The whole concept is you do not eat that which contains the source of life of the creature that has produced it. Remember the story of Moses leading the children of Israel out of captivity, having done battle with Pharaoh on again, off again. And finally he tells those Hebrew tribes, the time has come. The time has come. You are to slaughter a young calf. You are to drain its blood. Use the blood to mark the lintel of your house, so that when the angel of death flies over, it will pass you by. Eat your final meal. Eat it hastily. Consume the right food. And then flee to freedom. But notice how the sign is the blood over the door, drained from the animal that is to be the last meal. If you think this is some sort of superstition, then I invite you to visit the Kroger store in Toco Hills. It's 1 block up the street from a synagogue. It's the one place I know and the one Kroger store I know that is kosher. Because every morning when they open the store, one of the rabbis from that synagogue is at the door, who comes in and inspects the food, particularly the meat, and declares it kosher or not. You do not drink that which contains the substance of life of another being or another animal. And that's the source of that Last Supper. Mark is the first of the Gospels, the earliest, and John is the latest of the Gospels, the newest. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all contain the story of the Passover meal. Of Jesus celebrating the Passover with his disciples, taking the cup and saying, "This is my blood." And the bread, "This is my body." John's Gospel has no mention of the Last Supper. For him, the Last Supper is that scene on the hillside. The slaughtered animal and bread of the Passover is now his body. He is the Passover. And that's part of the uniqueness of John's Gospel. Let me tell you plead with you as you try to digest that. Story told by Fred Craddock. Fred Craddock was the professor of preaching at Emory's Candler School of Theology for many, many years. A great guy. Wonderful storyteller, wonderful preacher. He tells of being invited to speak in Winnipeg, Canada. It was early October. He was to lecture on a Friday night and again on a Saturday morning. I'm sure that the fee justified it and all expenses were paid. He asked about the weather. He had never been to Winnipeg. And what he was told was in October, it doesn't start getting really cold until the end of the month. You'll be fine. So he packed a light jacket, often wore this funny little driver's cap, and that's what he wore to Winnipeg. Met at the airport. His host took him to his motel. It was near a bus station that ran a bus to the campus where he was lecturing. So his transportation was nearby. Friday night went well. He was well received. Came back to his hotel and went to bed. About 5 o'clock, he noticed that he was reaching for covers. When he got up, it was snowing heavily. The wind was blowing. And his room was like an icicle. He said it's the longest hot shower. He ran it until the hot water ran out. His host called him to say that the Saturday morning class had been canceled because of weather. It was highly unusual. It was snowing so bad that his host could not get to the motel to take him to the airport. He said there's a bus station a block from where you're staying, and it runs a bus directly to the airport. There's a little place to eat near it. Fred said that he wrapped toilet paper around his head and ears and then put his hat on to help the cold. He paid his bill, left the motel, walked a block to the bus station and the adjacent little restaurant, which he described as a greasy spoon. He went in, trying to get warm. Yes, finally, the one person who was making his way around the tables, a big guy, overweight, with a very stained apron on, came to Fred and he said, "What do you want? What do you have?" And he said, "I'd like to see a menu." "Ain't no menu. We have soup." He said, "What else?" He said, "Soup." Fred said, he reluctantly said, "I'll take a bowl of soup." He brought the soup, plopped it down on the table. The place was filling up with other people trying to get out of the cold. Pretty soon it was full. Fred said he took a spoonful of that soup and tasted it, and it was probably the worst soup he had ever tasted. He said it was god-awful. So he sat there trying to get warm with this bowl of bad soup in front of him. At that time the door opened and a woman came in wearing a very light coat, really more of a sweater, obviously freezing. She took the last available seat. The greasy apron guy came over and said, "What do you have?" She said, "I'd like a glass of water." He said, "They ain't got no water. We got soup." He said, "I'd like a glass of water." He went about his business, came back, plopped down a glass of water, and said, "You have to order if you're going to stay here." She said, "I just want to get warm." "Then you got to leave." She reluctantly stood up and was making her way to leave. And Fred said it was just like magic. Every single person in the restaurant stood up, all starting to move towards the door. The greasy apron guy said, all right, I get the message. You can stay." They all sat down. They all had soup. Fred said he took his spoon and took another sip. He said, "You know, it's not bad soup." Another couple of minutes, he found himself shoveling the soup in. He said, "It may not be the best soup I ever had, but it was damn good." I put my spoon to the soup. You know, it was not bad soup. Everybody was eating the soup. I don't know what was in it, but I do recall when I was eating it, it tasted a little like bread and wine. Just a little like bread and wine.